Welcome, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. My name is Jody Holland. I teach in public policy leadership. We have 4 sections of Public Policy 101 as an introduction course into our program. I teach 2 of those sections. Dr. Bass teaches one. Stand up, Dr. Bass. I want to recognize you for a second. Dr. Novelli, I know he's coming because we got a little bit of an overlap. I just want to thank them for 1, embracing this idea years ago, and 2, participating in this project. If you want to know a little bit more about this, I was very fortunate that a couple of these students and Dr. Bass and I got together, and we were actually to put together a manuscript and publish on this activity for these students as a simulation. But we really created this because I was coming out of COVID, and I thought, how can we develop a program or an activity that can enhance the students' learning, but also creates a point of pride for them, a point of elevation, something that can inspire them, but most importantly, something that can connect them as a group. This is 4 classes coming together, 4 different sections, 1 class, 4 different sections, to do a 77-person group project. And that's the way I really I envisioned this. I didn't know how it was going to work, and now with the involvement of some upperclassmen that we're calling political coaches, this thing has really become a great program for our freshmen in our introduction class to do those 4 points of elevating, inspiring, connecting, and developing a place of pride for them. So, and it's at a place where it's kind of running itself, to tell you the truth, which I'm very happy about, because you never know, I might get hit by a bus, and we need to keep this thing going. At the end of the day, though, I walked in class today, and it's very interesting. Now we're in week 13. When I walk in week 1 and 2, the students are just sitting there, and there's not a lot of discussion or not a lot of connection. And today I walked in, and after 3 weeks of really working on this project, I really couldn't even get the class to settle down to start class. And it's great because I know they're connecting, and they're learning, and they're developing, and they're building friendships among each others. And that's what's going to be important for them in the next 3 or 4 years when they go out on the market, is knowing that they came from this program and that they're going to help each other throughout their careers. And we see it over and over and over again. So that's kind of the impetus of this program. Now, real quickly, if you're a coach, raise your hand or stand up. Where are you guys? Yes, please give them a hand. They've done an amazing job of helping guide and steer and be a part of this, and help these individuals really be a part of growing in this content and having structure around this. So it's very important that we do this for sure. Judges, thank you guys for being a part of this. We really appreciate that. We hope that we can see what we need to over here, and that's not blocking, but we'll move that if we need to. But thank you guys for being a part of this. Just to let you know, when this is over, we're going to throw up a QR code. We're going to have a People's Choice Award that if you will vote on. I just thought about how students are going to vote on it too, whatever. A People's Choice Award for this. And during the exam week, we will actually have some awards that we give out based on the judges' calculations for the battle for the gavel. So this will be for bragging rights among these teams. So I appreciate you guys being here. Afterwards, students, we will have a short pizza party in lot 113, excuse me. Any other questions, any other announcements, statements? Whose is this? Where did I get this from? You have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Holland. Welcome in, everyone. I hope everybody's doing good tonight. Thank you for joining us for the 5th edition of the Law Institute's mock congressional hearing, better known as Dr. Holland calls it, the Battle for the Gavel. First, I would like to extend our thanks to a few people who made this all possible. Thank you to our communications team. We have co-directors Mackenzie Cox and Jacob Williams. With them, we have Ava Bodmer, Zoe Huff, and Brooke Baumgardner. Thank you for all the hard work getting this out and making sure that we have this live stream up and running. And then I want to give some thanks to our wonderful coaches who helped put this together. So for our side, we have Wilson Angerizer, Ella Grace Young, Jillian Gillis, Easton Chandler. And then their side has Isaiah Goss, Paul Winfield, Mason Johnson, and Kate Mayo. I I want to give a special shout out to our judges. Thank you guys for giving up your time to be here tonight. We have Jeffrey Yost, Eloise Tyner, Nathan Oakes, Jeremy Alexander, and our ASB president, Jack Jones. Thank you guys. And of course, we have to recognize Dr. Holland, Dr. Bass, and Dr. Novelli for putting this together. Thank you all for putting this hearing together and prepping us for tonight throughout the year. Our professors and coaches have ensured that tonight is going to run smoothly. It's going to be entertaining, informative, and just over the last 3 weeks, we've worked tirelessly to put this together. You know, we've had early mornings, late nights. It's been some of the busiest weeks of the year with our policy paper, our presentations, and of course, exams coming up. So really proud of everybody for putting in the work, and thank you to our coaches who give up their time to make this happen. So this hearing is going to follow the President's authorization of military force to stop crime. Tonight, we will serve as the Senate Armed Forces Committee, the committee in which our very own Senator Wicker chairs. Before we begin, I would like to remind everybody that this is an informational hearing. Although there may be theatrics involved, the majority of the work put into this came from researching laws, regulations, and statistics. Playtime's over. Thank you, Paul. So with that being said, we will now commence. And first, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Marr to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The Senate Committee on Armed Services will come to order. Before we begin, I would like to remind all senators, witnesses, and audience members participating in today's hearings of the rules of this committee. Senators must maintain decorum for the duration of this hearing. Please be courteous as we have important work to achieve tonight. Before hearing opening statements from each of our committee members, I will administer the oath to witnesses. Please rise. Raise your right hand and answer this question. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. I am Mike Cavanaugh, senior senator from the great state of Texas. This hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee has been called to further investigate the current use of military force by the Trump administration to stop crime. This committee must affirm the administration's tactical deployments of the National Guard and use of military drone technology to combat crime in this country. Our obligations are clear: stop the flow of drugs, defend our cities, and reinforce the rule of law where it has been undermined. 3 things have led us to this hearing tonight: the widespread crime epidemic in America, the necessity of a response, and the legality behind it. We live in unprecedented times. Drugs have been flowing across the southern border like never before. Fentanyl is trafficked from Asia and South America right into our very own borders. Last year, over 850,000 pounds of drugs were seized by local law enforcement agencies across the country, but even more managed to poison our community. Drugs trafficked into the country directly led to over 105,000 overdose deaths and contributed to the 23,000 homicides experienced nationwide last year. This April, officials in my state of Texas charged a drug trafficker, already once convicted, with murder. He supplied what would be the fatal dose of fentanyl to a young boy. He should still be alive today. These criminal networks and gangs profit off exporting drugs and violence into our community. In Texas, we are dedicated to putting a stop to crime. Similarly, upon entering office in January, President Trump made his goals clear. America will be tough on crime. Across the board, we agree. A sound majority say that crime is a major issue across the country, and a resounding 81% agree that it is the biggest issue cities face this year. Americans made it clear at the polls, something needs to be done about this. President Trump has taken the necessary steps to combat drug trafficking and violent crime across the country. Deploying the National Guard and utilizing naval drone technology to defend our communities is nothing new. In fact, the very statute that President Trump used to send the National Guard to these cities has been used by 16 other administrations. And every single president in modern history has utilized drone technology to keep our communities safe. Cartels, drug lords, and domestic terrorist organizations pose just as big as a threat to our country as any foreign nation does. As members of the Armed Services Committee, it is our duty to oversee that the use of military force is justified and responsible. Title 10, U.S. Code 12406 authorizes the president to call forth the National Guard if unable to maintain the rule of law with normal force. Local law enforcement agents in this country are overwhelmed by adversity. With expanding criminal networks, billions in funding cuts, and a growing demand to ensure safety, our law enforcement agents are more strained than ever. Code 12406 provides the statutory authority for the president to utilize his power as commander-in-chief to support the guiding mission of our law enforcement officers. Every day without action to stop the spread of America's criminal epidemic is a day wasted. Regardless of party, we all want our communities to be safe. As elected officials, our biggest responsibility is to ensure the safety and well-being of the American people. By supporting this mission together, we can restore the rule of law to this country. Our duty is clear, and we will rectify it. With that, we will now hear an opening statement from Ranking Member Marr.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to my fellow researchers, staff members, legislators, Chief of Staff, and the Chair for making this hearing possible. I am Senator Marr from the great state of California. Recently, my state learned all too well what happens when a president takes drastic military measures without congressional approval. In the wake of this unprecedented display of executive overreach, my constituents are left wondering how such a thing was possible. I must admit, I am too. To make matters worse, my home state of California is not the only state affected by this, but many other states as well, and it won't stop there. How can a president go against a governor's explicit wishes by sending the National Guard into cities for civil unrest? It seems to me that the deployment of the National Guard within American borders causes more unrest than it has solved. It is an entirely different story when a president operates within his boundaries to use the National Guard with a governor's consent to help with natural disaster relief. This entire situation only becomes more ironic when taking into account that President Trump said in 2020, we have to go by the laws. We can't call in the National Guard unless we're requested by a governor. Clearly, it seems like he has changed his tune. Furthermore, why was the National Guard asked to do the job of law enforcement? This blurring of the line between military and law enforcement is downright confusing, not to mention illegal. The military's focus should be on the enemy abroad, not creating an enemy within. Not to mention, our president is bombing boats without congressional approval that supposedly have narcotics on board, yet no evidence of this has been given to the American public. The United States has killed over 80 people. Over 22 boats have been destroyed. Most importantly, innocent people have lost their lives because of this. People just trying to support themselves or their families. This was not a one-time display of force, but rather an ongoing occurrence that has been happening for 2 months. Why would the United States, the country of due process, not prosecute these individuals rather than kill them mercilessly? All of these actions have been taken without congressional approval. This is an issue affecting all Americans and straining our international relations. If America allows President Trump to continue at this rate, before we know it, America will be no better than a dictatorship where dissenters are scared to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Marr. We will now hear from Senator Breville of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh, and good morning, everyone. I would first like to thank all of us that have come together to make this hearing possible, and I'd like to extend a welcome to our esteemed guests here today. I'm Senator Breville of the great state of Florida, And the American people have sent us a message today, a very clear message. We have to do something to stop crime. 6 in 10 Americans have said that reducing crime must be a top priority, 10% more before President Biden took office. And this concern isn't partisan. Democrats, Republicans, and independents all share this same fear for their families and for their communities. Why is that? This is because leaders across the board have failed to act while crime has surged. Cities have fallen behind, cartels have grown stronger, and traffickers have pushed record levels of lethal drugs into our neighborhoods. Leadership demands courage, and drastic times call for decisive measures. Yet, instead of focusing on public safety, opponents here and nationwide have focused on political points rather than stopping traffickers. And let's be perfectly clear. Using military assets to enforce the rule of law is not unprecedented, as my colleague Chairman Kavanaugh said earlier. Congress has long given presidents power to federalize the National Guard when state and local law enforcement lack the manpower or resources to face an overwhelming threat. Governors and presidents on both sides of the aisle have used this authority. And at sea, every modern president has used military precision, including drones, to disrupt threats to the United States. Targeting cartels, smuggling vessels are no different. When fentanyl and other synthetic poisons are entering by the ton, that is not merely a crime, that is a national security threat. Cartels operate with military-grade tactics, encrypted communications, and sophisticated maritime routes. Stopping them requires the most capable forces we have. Local police simply cannot match that level of threat. And our mission today is simple: protect the American people. A targeted, justified military response, when authorized by Congress or by statute and executed to uphold the rule of law, is not only appropriate, it is necessary. By acting decisively today, we can restore trust in our institutions and ensure Americans can live their lives without fear. Thank you, Trent.
Thank you, Senator Breville. We will now hear your opening statement, Senator Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh. Good evening. My name is Senator Michael Wallace, and I have the privilege of representing the great state of New Mexico. For too long now, major cities have been faced with high outbreaks of crime and drug trafficking. Police departments have simply been outpaced by the magnitude of crime and drug trafficking plaguing our cities. The sluggish reaction from various police departments is truly sickening because countless lives have been lost from the inactiveness of these law enforcement officials. The current administration has not just deployed the Guard as a first response to the problem. Crime has run rampant throughout cities like Memphis, Los Angeles, and Chicago for years on end. Yet, we have seen major budget cuts from police departments such as LAPD and Chicago PD. These budget cuts have also led to staffing issues within these departments. Police departments have grown less effective because they simply lack the required resources to enforce the law. The president saw a necessary need for these underfunded and understaffed police departments to receive additional aid from the National Guard. Officials have unnecessarily repudiated the president's efforts by saying that the National Guard was brought in a non-crisis situation. Yet, people are being brutally murdered and giving lethal drugs that lead to overdose. I am deeply perplexed how this is not a crisis. As Chairman Kavanaugh mentioned before, more than 850,000 pounds of drugs entered our borders last year. This is a significant amount of drugs that were in circulation. These drugs led to innumerable overdoses, and it is worrying that this amount of drugs are even able to enter our borders. We have seen the guards deployed in cities like Memphis successfully help patrol and deter streets from drug trafficking to reduce overdoses. Residents where the National Guard are deployed have felt overall safer in their communities. Sadly, we still see officials complain about the president's attempt to make their communities safer. These same officials, however, have sat years in office and done nothing to help the crime. It seems that governors are too distracted by party lines to help their people. Let us remember that a crucial part of being an effective leader is the ability of cooperation. I urge this committee to realize the current administration's goal was to not act as a dictatorship, as some have called it, but to restore the American value of law and order. No person should constantly look over their shoulders to feel safe, and no mother or father should worry about their child overdosing. It is time that America puts an end to crime and drug trafficking because it has tortured our communities for far too long. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for your opening remarks, Senator Wallace. We will now hear from you, Senator Baugh.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh, and good evening, everyone. My name is Senator Baugh, and I have the honor of representing the great state of Illinois, one of the states directly affected by the issue before us today. In the past 2 months, we have all heard countless exaggerated claims about so-called lawlessness in Chicago and other American cities. Yet, the data tells a very different story. Shootings are down 36%, and homicides are down 27%, reaching a 60-year low for this time of year in Chicago. Despite this progress, these misleading narratives of chaos have been used to justify unprecedented military action by President Donald Trump, like the deployment of the National Guard into my home state. In early October, President Donald Trump federalized hundreds of National Guard troops to Chicago under Title X, claiming a military presence was needed to protect federal property and assist law enforcement. But the degree of necessity for such an action is highly debatable. Illinois Governor Pritzker did not authorize this deployment, and Chicago Mayor Johnson opposed it. Even more, the dubious circumstances cited by the White House did not meet the legal thresholds required under Title X. As a result, a federal judge issued a temporary restraining order blocking the deployment of troops into Illinois, which was later upheld by an appellate court. Today, Guard troops remain in Illinois under federal control, yet they are not legally permitted to perform any policing, patrolling, or civilian law enforcement. In other words, our troops and service members are being taken away from their families, communities, and full-time careers to sit in uncertainty, stuck between courts and politics over a deployment that never should have been launched. So let's be clear. These actions are not a sincere effort to protect public safety. They are an attempt to exert power, not maintain order. The National Guard is exclusively trained to confront external threats, which is completely different than civilian policing. Right now, we are being asked to accept that the president can sidestep governors, override local leadership, and deploy military force into American cities without even meeting the most basic statutory requirements. We cannot allow fear-mongering to replace law. We cannot allow political theater to masquerade as public safety. And we absolutely cannot allow the United States military to be used as a prop in domestic politics. When federal judge April Perry blocked the Guard's deployment to Chicago, she warned that such military action would only add fuel to the fire. But that may be exactly what President Trump intends to do. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks, Senator Baugh. We will end this period with your opening remarks, Senator Feldman.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh, and good evening. I'm Senator Feldman, and I have the honor of representing the great state of Tennessee. I would like to begin by discussing the current situation in my state. President Trump announced the involvement of the National Guard in Memphis as part of a crime crackdown, and the governor, Bella Vest, authorized the deployment of the National Guard. The governor has the power to call up the National Guard in special circumstances and has the correct authority to bring the National Guard into Tennessee. This is an example of the governor and the federal government working together. What is not an example of the federal government and a governor working together is President Trump sending the National Guard into California, Oregon, and Illinois. I am outraged by the president illegally sending the National Guard into my fellow senator states. Trump took control of these states himself over objections from state and local leaders who believe such interference violates their sovereignty and federal law. Thankfully, this week, courts in Illinois and Oregon blocked President Trump's efforts to deploy troops into cities in those states. But the issue still remains. President Trump is overstepping his authority in other states. Trump has broken the 10th and the 14th Amendment. State autonomy is being eroded by the forceful executive power before our very eyes. State autonomy is the ability for a state to govern itself and make independent decisions without outside interference. And this is a right that states have in America granted by the 10th Amendment. A line is being crossed by the executive branch. Deploying troops in areas without local authorities' prior request or approval undermines the very foundation of democracy and states' rights. It starts with states' rights, but where does it end? What makes you believe that your individual rights will not be overstepped in the exact same way? States have the right to govern themselves as they please, within the limits of federal laws. And this is exactly what California, Oregon, and Illinois were trying to do until abrasive executive power swept in and weakened their autonomy. So my question for you today is, will we allow the federal government to trample on states' rights, or will we stand up for the constitutional rights that states have in America? Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time to be absorbed by the chair.
Thank you, Senator Feldman. This committee will now hear the opening statements of our expert witnesses, beginning with you, Governor Vest.
Chairman, ranking member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Bella Vest, and I serve as the governor of Tennessee. Leading the great people of Tennessee is an honor and a privilege. But our two largest cities, Memphis and Nashville, are in a state of crisis because of violent crime. While Nashville is ranked 13th in the nation for violent crime, Memphis is nationally ranked as the city with the most violent crime per capita. In the 3 years I've been in office, I've facilitated education reform, promoted mental health and addiction awareness, and supported community-based violence prevention programs. In an effort to effectively eliminate violent crime, I've introduced legislation to grow and strengthen law enforcement and to also reform the judicial system to keep dangerous criminals off the streets. Both of these are essential to addressing this grave problem and establishing order in these communities. But my efforts have been thwarted by political opponents. Our situation has grown to be so dire that the hardworking citizens of these cities cannot live normal, productive lives without fearing for their and their family's safety. As reform efforts have been attempted, the problem has completely spiraled out of control. School shootings should not be normalized. Mothers and children should be able to walk to the park without fear of being robbed or assaulted. The level of anxiety and complete upheaval in our major cities is at the level of an insurrection. This has required federal assistance to deploy the National Guard to protect our citizens and to establish order and peace. An emergency of this size must be addressed. I urge the committee to understand the gravity of this problem and the duty that we as elected officials have to defending law-abiding citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Vest. We will now move on to your opening remarks, Director Daigle.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh. Good evening. My name is Julia Daigle, and I currently serve as the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As Director of the FBI, it is my duty to focus on national security threats and federal crimes. One of the President of the United States' main duties is to protect our citizens. In order to do so, the President is able to utilize National Guard troops and authorize drone strikes for our country's protection. But let's talk about the reasoning behind the President's actions. Drugs, drug usage, drug arrests, and drug trafficking are all on the rise in our nation. Drug arrests make up 26% of all arrests in America. And in 2022, fentanyl and other synthetic opioids accounted for almost 70% of American lives lost. And in case percentages don't impact you, that is 105,000 Americans who die of drug overdoses every year. Why is this the case? 2 reasons. 1, law enforcement is understaffed and underpaid. And 2, illegal drugs are making it across our borders. To address those 2 issues, the President acted within his authority by sending National Guard troops to address crime emergencies, and by authorizing drone strikes on drug carriers. These are not the only solutions to the rising crime rates, but they are an effective and constitutional solution, and finally allowed this nation to show that we are tough on crime. As the Director of the FBI, it is not my duty to dictate national security, national defense. My duty is to advise the President or Congress, which is what I hope to do today. I look forward to your questioning, Senators. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Daigle. We will now hear your opening remarks, Secretary Smith.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh. It is an honor to speak at this hearing today. My name is Morgan Smith, and I have the privilege of serving as Secretary of Defense for this great country. I work closely with the President to protect our great nation from foreign and domestic threats, both of which we are facing in great magnitudes today. I am intimately aware of the details of U.S. military action in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, specifically regarding recent drone strike missions. And although the decision to take aggressive measures is never an easy one to make, it is my job to ensure we are doing everything in our power to protect our citizens from the dangers of illegal drug networks and smuggling operations. Left unchecked, these criminals will continue using aquatic vessels to bring extremely harmful narcotics and chemicals into our country, where the effects will be seen not only in large cities, but in small-town America too. This is an ever-present threat, and one that we have every authority to respond to with lethal force, especially as we continue seeing devastatingly high overdose rates in the U.S., with approximately 80,000 drug-related deaths being reported in 2024 alone. As if these problems weren't already pressing enough, within our borders, we are facing dire conditions in our major cities. Partly as a result of illegal immigration and drug peddling, we are facing crime emergencies in what should be our proudest destinations. When the citizens of DC walk down the streets of our nation's capital, they should not be met with the sight of used needles on the ground. They should not hear gunshots. They should not perceive their home to be a dangerous place, but we have allowed it to become that. To respond to this emergency, the President used his lawfully sanctioned powers to deploy troops from the National Guard to our capital and other large cities. In full support of this, I signed an order in August authorizing many of these troops to carry weapons, a decision I believe will help us to get our cities back on track in the pursuit of making America great again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Daigle. We will now hear your statement. Dr. Bouillon.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dr. Bouillon, a policy analyst and professor of constitutional law at Yale Law School, and I am here to talk about the Trump administration's unconstitutional deployment of the National Guard and authorization of drone strikes against suspected drug boats. The President cites Title 10, Section 12406 to justify his deployments, which allows federalizing the National Guard only in the event of invasion, rebellion, or when regular forces cannot execute the law. Yet, President Trump officially states that his reason for deployment is domestic crime and unrest, local issues. Since he deployed the Guard in several states that explicitly refused, the President is overriding state police power protected under the 10th Amendment. However, the real question isn't whether he can use troops under the Title 10, but whether the situation legally qualifies as an invasion. He equates undocumented immigrants to an invasion, but under the Logan Act, private citizens cannot act as foreign governments, meaning individuals cannot legally count as foreign invasion. Further, the Posse Comitatus Act limits federal military personnel from enforcing domestic laws. When the Guard is deployed under Title 32, they are under state control and exempt from the act. But when federalized under Title 10 in states that do not request it, they become federal troops subject to the act. President Trump's deployment makes the Guard federal, violating the act and the Constitution. Turning to the drone strikes, Section 2C of the War Powers Act states that the President can only use the military if Congress declares war, passes a law specifically authorizing it, or there is an actual attack or national emergency. Drug trafficking does not meet this threshold. Also, Section 5B shows that Trump has greatly exceeded the grace period of acting in an unauthorized manner. President Trump is blurring the line between presidency and dictatorship while we watch helplessly. This Congress must hold him accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bouillon. We will now hear your statement, Governor Bullock.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Chair. I'm Governor Bullock, and I'm honored to stand in front of this committee today to represent my beloved state of California. Serving as governor of the largest and most diverse state in the Union, as well as the 5th largest economy on the planet, I attend this hearing before you all to serve my state, but to denounce the situation at hand, the unlawful deployment of the National Guard into our states and cities. This June, President Trump called for federal control to serve in civilian law enforcement roles on the streets of Los Angeles and other communities in Southern California. This action was uncalled for, unprovoked, an entire breach of my state's individual rights and federalism as a whole, our balance between federal and state power. Yet we are actively watching as President Trump infringes closer and closer to destroying this balance. Therefore, I'm here to call for the defederalization of our state National Guard. Under state direction, California National Guard members have always been deployed in support of our communities, acting as surge medical staff in crisis, helping with wildfire management, supporting fentanyl interdiction, and now, as the President withheld food stamps from hungry families, the Guard was distributing food to those in need. When the President takes away the National Guard from their duties, these essential roles are not being fulfilled. With these facts in effect, I refuse to sit idly by and watch as the President oversteps his bounds of power. Along with myself, the governor of Illinois and Oregon have been completely baffled at the President's autocratic behavior of sending these troops to our states, which blatantly disagree with the action. Deploying these troops without our consent, as well as Congress approval, is unlawful and completely unacceptable. I'm pleading with you all today. We cannot sit aside and watch as the President infringes on our state's freedoms with his authoritarian tactics. Let this hearing be the beginning of justice and a reminder that our country is built upon the promise of freedom and the constitutional rights of state and federal government. These foundational principles will continue to be stripped from us if we do not act. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Bullock. We will end this period with your statements. Former Secretary Cohn.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Aiden Cohn. I served as the Secretary of Defense under President Biden. And I'm here to argue that today's drone strikes fall outside the legal standard and strategic judgment that guided prior administrations. When I approved strikes, we operated under post-9/11 laws, allowing force against foreign terrorist groups, planning active attacks on Americans. Intelligence was uncovering credible plots, so limited military force against these networks was necessary. Every strike followed wartime rules, matched security objectives, and stayed within the law. That threat picture has changed. Major terrorist organizations have been weakened, and leaders in both parties, including President Biden, moved to narrow or appeal these authorizations as outdated. When the threat that justifies wartime powers recede, those powers should be tightened, not turned into a police tool. Yet the current administration is using military drones to strike boats based on assumptions that they carry drugs. These vessels are far from American shores, pose no immediate threat to American lives, and are not part of any declared war. This is a law enforcement challenge, and using military force stretches the post-9/11 authorities beyond what Congress intended. We already have the tools, the Coast Guard, Customs and Border Protection, and joint task forces to stop large quantities of illegal drugs every day. If the goal is really to protect American communities, the sensible choice is to strengthen proven capabilities, not to rely on legally questionable and distant drone strikes that do little to slow the drug crisis and that risk setting a dangerous precedent. Thank you.
Thank you, former Secretary Cohn. This committee will now move into a time of questioning, beginning with questions from the chair. Director Daigle, as you observed in your opening statement, drugs make up a significant portion of criminal cases in this country. However, this is not only limited to drug use. Drug trafficking is proven to directly cause many of the violent crimes in our country. I believe that these National Guard deployments are necessary steps to prevent crime, as local and federal Democrats have sanctioned slashes to police budgets across the country. I want to ask you, Director Daigle, is the President's response to this rational?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Chairman. Deploying the National Guard is a rational response. For example, in Washington, D.C., the police department saw a $15 million budget cut in 2020, and then a 37% increase in violent crime in 2023. Deployment was not only rational, but necessary. A rational way to address understaffed police departments and rising crime rates is to send them more help.
I agree, Director. It is unfair to expect them to respond to this crisis when they are understaffed and underfunded. Now I would like to turn to you, Governor Vest. When the National Guard was federalized to respond to this issue, why did you work with them to ensure a swift and effective response? And has it been a successful partnership with the Memphis Safe Task Force?
Reports indicate that there are about 2,500 violent crimes per 100,000 residents in Memphis and 1,100 in Nashville, which is thousands above the national average of 300 crimes per 100,000 residents. These statistics are not only disheartening, they are unacceptable. That is why, as governor, I've welcomed the President's deployment of the National Guard to Memphis. The Memphis Safe Task Force has not only cleared thousands of warrants, but they've also taken hundreds of illegal firearms off the streets, many of which belong to repeat offenders and organized trafficking operations. I'm also grateful to be able to announce that our task force has rescued and safely returned over 100 children who have previously been missing. Those children are safe tonight because of our partnership with the National Guard. The Guard's heroism continues to remind our citizens that their safety has and always will be our #1 priority.
Governor, it seems to me like our National Guardsmen are highly trained and well-equipped to combat crime. As you stated, they have saved countless lives. Unfortunately, consistent neglect of our intelligence has allowed the very trafficking rings that funnel these guns and drugs into our community to evolve and evade capture. Our military has taken action against these networks now, conducting well-informed, highly precise strikes on drug-carrying vessels. How many drone strikes did you authorize during your term as former Secretary Cohn?
In 2021, the United States carried out roughly 439 air operations, which resulted in 12 civilian deaths worldwide that entire year. In the last 2 months, this new campaign has caused over 80 deaths and counting. It is reprehensible to continue to ignore the human lives caused by the current use of drone attacks. President Trump does not have the legal authority to order these strikes. We are not in a declared state of war, and nothing about the current climate justifies pretending that we are. If the president is truly serious about protecting his own people, he should be fighting the war on drugs here at home, not using overseas drone strikes as a substitute for already proven and effective methods.
Thank you, former Secretary Cohn. Luckily, we are focused on containing the spread of narcotics at home. The National Guard has seized thousands of pounds of narcotics across the country, but it needs to be stopped at the source. We may not be in a state of war, but they seem to be. These militant cartels stock their boats full of deadly drugs destined straight for the southern border. Their actions may have been tolerated under the Biden administration, but we will no longer allow these gangs to kill our citizens. Secretary Smith, you have conducted these drone strikes with excellent intelligence. Clearly, this is an issue beyond our local law enforcement. Does the administration have the authority to conduct these drone strikes in order to protect American citizens?
The administration, led by the president, has the complete and certain authority to conduct these drone strikes. His right to do so is protected under Title X, which specifically gives the Department of Defense the ability to carry out drone strikes to neutralize imminent threats against U.S. national security, including narcotics trafficking operations functioning in international waters. In fact, it has so far failed to be mentioned that former President Biden used the very same statute to justify his own missions. The difference is that under Biden's administration, those missions primarily targeted terrorist networks overseas. We are applying the same statute with a focus on the transnational cartels whose operations currently kill more Americans than terrorists do within our very own borders.
Thank you, Secretary Smith. On behalf of all the families who have lost a child to drugs and violence exported into our communities, I would like to thank all of you for your dedication to fixing this issue and giving it the notoriety that it deserves. Your information is invaluable to this committee. With that, I will now recognize Ranking Member Marr for her questions.
Governor Bullock, do you believe the National Guard was helpful in its deployment in early June to Los Angeles?
No. These troops are needed in crisis situations. For example, they were essential in our rehabilitation efforts in the aftermath of our state's wildfire crisis. However, in our current situation, there has not been a need for President Trump's federalization of the Guard to invade our cities. The deployment of the National Guard was unwarranted. Our state was handling things on our own. If we needed federal assistance, then we would have called for it.
Do you believe that President Trump is operating outside of his bounds as president by ordering the National Guard into Los Angeles?
Yes, absolutely. I have and will continue to speak out on not only is this unconstitutional, but deeply unpopular. Only 32% of our 39.4 million citizen population approve of the deployment of the National Guard into our state. This overreach of power of this sort cannot stand.
Thank you. So in the face of an imperial president, the elected officials of the very state they were elected to represent hold zero power. We must not stand for this. Dr. Bouillon, do you believe Trump's use of force meets the legal and constitutional criteria for a national emergency?
No.
Is he justified in his decision to continuously strike more ships?
No. Given the constraints of the War Powers Act, the situation at hand does not fall under the definition of a national emergency, which would require an actual attack on the United States or its armed forces. Seeing as though this or an act of Congress is not present, there is no legal basis for ongoing military action.
And yet, Americans are just supposed to be okay with these actions, even though they have no legal basis. Former Secretary Cohn, If you had been faced with a similar situation during your time serving as Secretary of Defense, how would you have handled this situation?
I can't ignore what our own records already tell us about bad intelligence. The Bush White House admitted the intelligence community was dead wrong in Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. That should be a permanent warning label on how we use force. This situation is no different. The risk of bad intel is simply too high to justify a missile strike. We've seen how this ends. In Iraq and Syria, flawed targeting contributed to more than 1,000 civilian deaths. In Pakistan, one mistaken missile on a religious school killed 80 people, many of them teenagers, because officials were convinced a terrorist that might be inside.
Thank you. The possibility of faulty intelligence must be taken seriously. People's lives are at stake. Secretary Smith, do you foresee drone strikes in the Eastern Pacific Ocean slowing down, or are they going to ramp up?
Given the demonstrated success of recent drone strikes, effectively eliminating thousands of pounds of cocaine before it ever had the chance to poison American communities, this tactic will continue to be a part of a sustained campaign against narcotics cartels. Applying continued pressure is the most effective way to ensure these organizations cannot regroup, reestablish their networks, and continue exploiting the maritime corridors that fuel so much violence.
Thousands of pounds of cocaine? This is the first I've heard of this. I have not seen any credible sources referencing this number. It's incredible that this information is just now being revealed. Governor Vest, your situation is different because you asked President Trump to send the National Guard into your state despite the mayor's dissent. As a Republican governor, do you not believe in local autonomy? And are you implying that Tennessee requires the National Guard in order to protect its citizens?
Of course I believe in autonomy. I also believe in adhering to my oath as an elected official. There's historical precedence for my actions. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson authorized the use of the National Guard in Selma, Alabama, to protect a group of peaceful black protesters who'd been prevented from voting by Governor Wallace. This governor denied his citizens their constitutional and human rights as well as their personal safety. The problem is not that I lack the capability to protect my people. The problem is that a minority of officials in Tennessee are blocking me from passing effective legislation to protect our people.
Governor, Selma involved the Guard protecting citizens from state violence. That is nothing like this. Your mayors are not violating rights. They're governing. If your plan cannot earn support at home, that's not justification to override local autonomy with troops. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Marr, for your questions. Senator Breville, we will now hear your questions, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll begin with Dr. Bouillon. Dr. Bouillon, is it true that the Posse Comitatus Act only applies to federal armed forces?
Yes, it is true that the Posse Comitatus Act only applies to federal armed forces. It restricts these federal military forces from engaging in domestic law enforcement activities unless Congress expressly authorizes them.
And Doctor, is it also correct for me to say that the National Guard is exempt when under state control and only subject to the act when federalized under Title X, absent a statutory exception?
That is accurate. The National Guard does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Posse Comitatus Act when they are under state control, like when they are deployed under Title 32, which means that they are activated by the president but remain under the control of the state governor. They only become subject to the act when federalized under Title 10 unless Congress provides a specific statutory exception. To be clear, the traditional division of military forces to handle external threats and police to handle internal public safety is increasingly being disregarded. The 10th Amendment explicitly reserves police power to the states. This is not an issue for President Trump when state elected officials bend to his will, but it gets more dicey when they govern with autonomy.
I'd like to point out for the record that President Trump has federalized the Guard under Title 10 U.S.C. 12406 and has utilized the exception of ensuring the protection and safety of federal personnel and property. As seen in this memo, and without objection, I ask that this memo be approved to the record.
Without objection.
Now, Director Daigle, With the sheer amount of fentanyl that the Drug Enforcement Administration has seized, which has tripled since 2021, can you explain how trafficking networks have evolved in both sophistication and scale based on intelligence from the Bureau?
Yes, these increases reflect how trafficking networks have grown in both sophistication and lethality. Cartels now operate decentralized mobile labs that can be relocated quickly, and they mix lethal doses of fentanyl into drugs, resulting in products that can kill thousands with just a few kilograms. Additionally, traffickers are becoming more violent and reckless. These sophistications are why the United States has expanded intelligence collection, maritime surveillance, and targeted interception efforts to disrupt these lethal networks before they can result in a further loss of life.
And Director, based on what you just said, would you characterize this as a national security threat?
Yes.
Now, Secretary Smith, can you explain the training of a typical military police battalion of a state National Guard unit?
Our enlisted guardsmen go through basic training and advanced individual training over 20 weeks that is specific to those serving in military police. Additionally, most guardsmen also attend courses for active shooter response, advanced weapons and marksmanship, less lethal certifications, and selections for special reaction teams. They continue ongoing training for all types of scenarios and are taught the law in regards to their limits in civilian law enforcement and their powers under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Use of force and de-escalation techniques are reinforced in every unit, and I stand confident in our military police leaders.
Secretary, I hope you'll appreciate my coaster here, Army coaster, and can you please take the second to address the notion that the Guard is not qualified for law enforcement?
I would like to take that moment to dispel the notion that our National Guard is unqualified for law enforcement roles. This is disrespectful and spits in the face of service members who have signed an order amidst the 2020 isolation riots to activate the National Guard to protect the people of Minnesota, completely of his own volition. That's right. A blue state official recognized that when violence threatens public safety, the National Guard is exactly the qualified force you call. Their training, discipline, and structure make them uniquely capable of stabilizing volatile situations, and Governor Walz knew that. In addition, it's important to note that strategy worked amazingly well. Their presence proved so essential that nationwide, more than 17,000 Guard troops were mobilized to assist in cities across 23 states and D.C. during the unrest.
I'm very glad you brought up that point, and I would like to submit for the record that memo from Governor Walz, in addition to a memo from Governor Bullock that did the same thing in 2020.
So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as the Secretary of Defense said, the Guard is qualified, and it is the force you call when you need to stabilize a volatile situation.
Thank you, Senator Breville. We will now hear questions from Senator Baugh.
Thank you, Chairman Kavanaugh. I would first like to ask Dr. Bouillon, from a constitutional standpoint, to what extent is the National Guard intended to engage in domestic affairs?
The National Guard Creed emphasizes that the Guard's identity is rooted in being a citizen soldier, not military police. They are present in moments of national conflict for federally authorized missions that clearly meet constitutional thresholds, but equally committed to serving communities during emergencies like disaster responses.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Now to former Secretary Cone. How does National Guard training differ from that of civilian law enforcement officers? And how does this impact what's happening on the ground?
To my knowledge, the National Guard is trained to respond to domestic emergencies, not day-to-day policing. Guardsmen receive combat training and are trained to assist during disasters and civil unrest. By contrast, police officers undergo full-time academy and field training, enforcing state and local laws, preventing crime, and investigating incidents. When Guard units are used as police, we are asking them to perform tasks for which they are not trained for. We see in recent court cases in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., many of these troops come from out of state, lack experience in city policing, and raise serious risks of confusion and escalation on the streets.
So contrary to what my fellow senators may be suggesting, the National Guard is not trained to police civilians. Secretary, based on your experience, have you ever seen National Guard deployments produce a lasting decrease in crime rates?
No, National Guards potentially create a short-term drop in crime, likely because citizens see armed soldiers and armored convoys patrolling their streets, but that effect fades quickly. Once they leave, crime goes back to where it was because nothing about the underlying problems changed.
Thank you. Now to FBI Director Daigle. Since the FBI tracks national crime patterns, can you cite any case where military deployments led to a lasting decline in crime rates?
Well, as I'm sure we all know, these deployments have been quite recent, so there's no long-lasting effect to measure yet. But in Albuquerque, New Mexico, they have seen a 20% decrease in shootings after the involvement of the National Guard to support law enforcement. But I want to be clear that these aren't meant to be long-term solutions. They're meant to be short-term solutions to understaffing.
So these National Guard deployments are based on loosely defined emergencies with no proven long-term impact on crime. Thank you. Governor Bullock, instead of relying on military deployments, your administration invested in actual crime prevention tools. Can you explain why you chose effective strategies over military deployment?
Absolutely. Crime in our state has been declining over the past few years, and to keep the momentum, we partner with local governments and the California Highway Patrol through my California Comeback Plan. Our focus has been on preventing crime before it occurs, investing in communities, removing guns from prohibited individuals, and strengthening investigations. And it's working. Since implementing these strategies, $267 million in grants has helped 55 communities hire more officers and bring more felony cases forward. According to the California Department of Justice, every major crime category, including violent crime and homicides, declined in 2024.
That is so great. Governor, could you tell me what happens when President Trump blurs the line between military and civilian policing?
In my state, when military forces were deployed into our civilian communities, people did not feel safer. They felt watched and controlled. It created fear, confusion, and real distrust in the government that swore to protect them.
Thank you, Governor. I am so sorry your residents had to experience that, especially because my constituents voiced similar concerns when the president threatened to deploy troops into Chicago. My last question is for Governor Vest. Since the Guard isn't trained for policing and hasn't been shown to reduce crime long term, why not invest in proven policing programs instead?
First, Secretary Smith established that the National Guard does have extensive training and are qualified to protect citizens. In response to your question, I am in favor of long-term solutions and have previously attempted to pass legislation to improve crime rates before I brought in the National Guard. These attempts, however, were blocked. Our national average violent crime rate is thousands above average. The situation in Tennessee is an emergency that required immediate attention. Deploying the Guard was not the only way we are working to address our crime rates, but it is effective. My goal is to advocate for safer communities and to give a voice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Our citizens deserve to live in safe communities because safety should not be a luxury. It should be a basic human right.
I respect your dedication and understand your desire for a short-term response, but for the record, Secretary Smith's remarks referred specifically to military police battalions, not National Guard troops. And former Secretary Cohn just testified that the National Guard is being placed in situations they are not equipped to handle. With no evidence that these deployments produce a lasting reduction in crime, they function far more as political theater that intimidates the American people rather than genuine public safety policy. Thank you. That concludes my questioning.
Thank you, Senator Baugh. We will now hear your question, Senator Wallace.
Thank you. Governor Bullock, I want to hear more about the riots that ensued in Los Angeles this June. Federal charges have been brought against 10 individuals for violent offensive against federal agents. These criminals threw large rocks and scooters at officers, sprayed tear gas into moving vehicles, and set vehicles on fire. President Trump federalized the National Guard on June 7th in response to these anti-law enforcement riots. Due to the $150 million cut on LAPD's budget, police were unable to contain all the riots. Why then do you resist President Trump's attempt to help local law enforcement and quell the violence?
The protests that ensued in the city of Los Angeles on June 6 were in response to Trump's mass deportation initiative, as ICE raids have begun causing tension and fear within the cities of my state. Neither myself nor the LAPD approves of violent protesting as to why the LAPD responded to the violence and was attempting to contain it. Yes, there were struggles to contain these protests, but it all leads back to Trump's usage of the federal agents. First with the mass deportations, now the National Guard's presence in LA. His aggressive tactics have instilled fear and unrest that have led these civilians to feel unsafe in their own homes. As for the budget cuts, this is something the mayor of Los Angeles did under the council's own jurisdiction, something my state legislators had no hand in. However, the Los Angeles violent crime rates have been on a steady decline in the past 5 years. We allow the local governments to have the freedom to make laws as they see fit for their city, something the president is not respecting.
The LAPD's failed attempts to contain protesters and effectively contain the law was exaggerated by California's defunding efforts. Do you believe that the expertise of the National Guard could effectively assist your failing police department?
With all due respect, Senator, I would not categorize our department as a failure. LAPD is trained extensively for protests and riots. We have trimmed spending on administrative expenditures and certain aspects within the LAPD, yet I am more than willing to cooperate with the National Guard when I call for them. Whenever there is a clear need and the cooperation between federal and state governments, then and only then will the National Guard's help be warranted and helpful within my state.
Thank you, Governor. I hope that over time more resources will be restored into LAPD. As of right now, I hope that the Guard will continue to help LAPD be effective. I will now direct my questions to former Secretary Cohn. During Chairman Kavanaugh's questioning, you mentioned that you felt that drone strikes were not needed and unconstitutional. However, these drone strikes are done as protection against foreign drugs entering our country and potentially killing Americans. As Commander-in-Chief, the President is tasked with utilizing the military to protect American sovereignty and safety. When the majority of fentanyl is coming from South America, why are you heavily resisting the added protection of our citizens against these drug trafficking vessels?
I'm not resisting protecting Americans. I'm pushing back on the idea that we should be blowing up boats just so the president can have bragging rights on television. The facts aren't on his side. Customs and Border Protection shows most fentanyl is seized at ports of entry, and often in cars and trucks driven by Americans, not on boats in the Caribbean. And yet this maritime operation has fired off roughly 20 strikes in 2 months and killed around 80 people. For what? There's still no proof of drug seizures. At this point, it feels like we're bombing shadows for someone to score a headline, not solve a problem. That isn't a strategy. It's reckless, it's sloppy, and it puts lives at risk for nothing.
That is right, Secretary Cohn. The majority of drugs are captured at ports of entry, but millions of fatal doses continue to seep through our borders. That is why the administration has taken the necessary steps to combat crime at the source. I want to ask you, Secretary Cohn, does drug trafficking impact criminal activity?
Of course, drug trafficking drives crime. In 2021, this country lost over 100,000 Americans to overdoses, and roughly 3/4 of those deaths involving opioids. That is not a statistic. It is a national failure measured in coffins. These people running these trafficking networks are not misunderstood or unlucky. They are predators who pump poison into our communities and leave shootings, murders, and shattered families behind them. DEA leadership has warned for years about the deep and long-standing link between traffickers and violent crime, and the briefings I saw confirmed exactly that.
I agree. If we do not take action against these crime syndicates, they will continue to exploit weak maritime laws and export violence into our community. The administration also realizes this. This is why they have taken effective, measured responses to the evolution of crime in and outside our borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wallace. We will now conclude the questioning period with you, Senator Feldman.
Thank you. Former Secretary Cohn, I would like to call your attention to the unconstitutional drug strikes the president has been authorizing. President Trump stated his reasoning for the drone strikes is to hit drug cartels at the source. With your expertise in military commands, do you see this as proper reasoning to deploy a drone strike?
No, I do not. If the goal is to stop drugs, we already know it works. The Coast Guard alone seized roughly 500,000 pounds of cocaine in the Eastern and Pacific and Caribbean using law enforcement and maritime authority, not military drones. About 90% of fentanyl seized at the southwest border was caught at ports of entry. This is hard evidence that effective legal tools already exist. Turning drug enforcement into a long-distance campaign in Venezuela is not a strategy. It is a stunt.
Thank you. Dr. Bouillon, under what precedent is President Trump authorizing these drone strikes, and how does this hold up constitutionally?
He is relying on the Obama administration's 2011 Libya precedent. President Obama continued military action without congressional authorization by claiming that the War Powers Act did not apply because U.S. forces were not engaged in hostilities, which are defined as sustained combat situations where U.S. forces are at risk. As for its constitutionality, it was never upheld by the courts and was widely criticized for stretching the definition of hostilities to bypass the War Powers Act. Specifically, a former Republican speaker explicitly warned that the Obama interpretation violated both the statute and his constitutional duty to faithfully execute the law. As Ranking Member Marr said earlier, the Republican Party continues to contradict themselves.
Thank you. Director Daigle, in what ways do you see authorizing drone strikes on potential drugs far from our border helpful in keeping Americans safe?
Do I think it is ideal to resort to drug strikes on potential drug carriers? No, but we don't. We use intelligence to make informed decisions. This is an effective way to protect Americans by preventing illicit substances from entering our borders. The president does have the authority to authorize this solution. Just because one party doesn't agree doesn't mean it is out of the president's power.
But intelligence can be faulty. Intelligence was wrong for 10 years with Osama bin Laden. And as you said, we're taking out potential drug carriers. That does not seem ideal to either of us. As the director of the FBI, can you provide information to prove that these ships taken out by drones were in fact headed for the U.S. border? Because as you can see, they are quite far away from our border.
This information is confidential, but what I can state publicly is this. That spot that you pointed to on the map, that's a known maritime corridor that has been repeatedly used by transnational criminal organizations to move drugs destined for our borders. Many underestimate the complexity of drug trafficking. Of course it is not near our borders. Traffickers don't just dock their boats on our shores. Instead, it is an organized and sophisticated crime.
Despite your insinuation, Director, I do understand the complexities of drug trafficking. I just cannot support authorizing drone strikes on a whim based on possibly faulty intelligence. Dr. Bouya, considering what we have heard from Republicans backing up Trump's unilateral military action, how does this unilateral military action hold up constitutionally?
It holds up poorly. Drug trafficking does not meet the War Act's thresholds since it does not fall under an emergency or an attack. The required 60-day notification and authorization period expired without congressional approval or a request for an extension, and the only precedent the administration cites is itself constitutionally controversial.
Thank you. Secretary Smith, as current Secretary of Defense, do you support these drone strikes?
Yes, I do.
So you are in support of taking lives in order to stop drugs far from our border?
I am in support of stopping lethal narcotics that are explicitly destined for our most vulnerable communities.
Over 80 lives have been lost directly because of these drone strikes. How can you allow the extrajudicial killing of these people because they are potentially carrying drugs nowhere near our border? How can you justify the loss of their lives, and what would you tell their families?
The goal of these operations is not to take lives, but to save them. Our objective is to stop lethal narcotics from ever reaching our shores, where they fuel addiction, overdose deaths, and violent crime. As a reminder, we buried 80,000 of our own citizens last year who died painful and oftentimes violent deaths as a result of the drug crisis in America. What would you tell their families, Senator? That we prioritize the lives of 80 dangerous criminals and cartel members over those of thousands of our own people? I refuse to settle for that outcome. The criminal loss of life is absolutely worth it to save an estimated 25,000 American citizens per strike who would be negatively influenced by the thousands of pounds of cocaine and fentanyl detected on these vessels. So no, this is not about valuing one life over another. It is about confronting a threat that has already killed tens of thousands of Americans and taking measured, lawful steps to prevent further tragedy. Thank you.
Secretary, with respect, I do know the scale of the crisis. You are presenting a false choice. We can confront the overdose crisis with due process of law and respecting basic human dignity. And I also know this: I will not allow their deaths to become a justification for the government killing and then asking questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators, for the informative questions. With no further questions present, we'll start with closing statements, beginning with you, Ranking Member Moore.
Thank you to everyone in the audience and those that have shared their testimonies today. Witnesses, your insight allows my fellow senators and I to see the detrimental effects of the president's executive actions taken without congressional approval. In California, we see how elected officials' beliefs are utterly forgotten by a president's unwarranted actions. How can America be a representative democracy when the representation is bulldozed? Do not get me wrong. The National Guard is an amazing resource when used correctly. However, when we deploy the National Guard on our own citizens as if they are the enemy, this is where the problems begin, especially when it is under the guise of a national emergency. Further, in relation to the drone strikes, yes, America is facing a major issue with drugs. But why is it necessary to strike boats hundreds of miles away to help this problem? There are many other areas that could be strengthened first, instead of bombing boats on intelligence that has the possibility of being faulty. Over 80 people have been killed, and this number is only rising. This is an extremely relevant matter as it is happening right now. More drone strikes are occurring every day. Without aid from the courts, more cities would have the National Guard thrusted upon them. President Trump is making his message extremely clear. When the people disagree, the courts disagree, and the Constitution disagrees, he takes action anyways. The decision to not negotiate and instead kill civilians is one that future generations will be forced to grapple with. President Obama, a president who used his position to strike and kill members of Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group in charge of 9/11, even realizes that this decision to strike other countries should not be taken lightly. He reminded citizens, the decisions we are making now will define the type of nation and the world that we leave to our children. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to again thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you to our esteemed witnesses, especially, for their contributions. After tonight's hearing, I would hope there was one thing that we can all agree on. Something must be done about crime. It has ravaged our cities, broken apart families, and continues to be the top concern for voters across the political spectrum. Tonight, our witnesses told a clear story. If we work together, we can make a measurable difference. I'm still in awe of the heroics that the National Guard achieved in Memphis this month. Thanks to Governor Vest's leadership, the National Guard can work with local law enforcement to secure the city. However, these efforts receive pushback from my colleagues across the aisle. And despite attempts to conduct an informative, productive hearing, they continue to berate our esteemed witnesses purely to push a political agenda. We came today in a pursuit of progress. They came in a pursuit of an agenda. To the witnesses who so generously provided their time and input today, I apologize for the manner in which you were addressed. They implicated that you, the decorated and experienced individuals who sit before us, are recklessly choosing a path of death and destruction, and it is incredulous. The level of hypocrisy is unbelievable, as they seem to be in favor of letting violent criminals and drug dealers sail international waters destined directly for our borders. Despite this, I would still like to extend an opportunity to work together on this, to solve the crime epidemic. I hope that in the future, there can be and may be more productive conversations surrounding this issue, as it affects the lives of everyday Americans. Hardworking Americans, our constituents, are crying out for help, dying by the hundreds of thousands, and we must answer their plea. Before we close tonight, I would like to state that this committee will continue to provide oversight to ensure that these tools are used safely, responsibly, and effectively. Our obligations are clear, and tonight we reaffirmed our commitment to protect the American people. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this and listening, going through it. Students, let's give them another great round of applause. They put this entire script together. I encourage you before you leave to look at the organization chart to see where each student played a role in this event and this simulation. We can get you a copy of the script if you want to fact check any of this, because it's the first time I heard it. We let them have so much autonomy in this project to see exactly how this is going to design and build their leadership characteristics is through communication, team building, conflict management. These are all aspects that we know of leadership that they need to continue to grow in their skills. So students, we're going to go to lot 113. Parents, attendees, anyone else, you're welcome to join. I don't know how much pizza is going to be there, but students, that's where you're going to actually check in on the roll to make sure that you were here. So be sure you come by there even just for a minute. I know we've had a lot of other extracurricular activities tonight, so we appreciate everyone being here. Is that a wrap, guys? Thank you very much for being here.